but the value of artisanal code is zero.
Yeah.
Unless there's probably some niche market, right? There's probably some like tiny amount of people, but like code inherently has no value is what the code does. So if you've attached yourself to the craft of code, and now there's no reason for that to be as important as it was before, then we have some sadness there, I think. Do we know the upper limit of productivity of an engineer right now? I think no. We really don't know. So we should probably invest our time in thinking how we can get towards that limit first, before we think about needing to bring up more people.
Hey, Luca here. Welcome to a new episode of the Refactoring podcast, where every 2 weeks we interview a world-class tech leader. Today's guest is James Stanier, CTO at Nordhealth, former director at Shopify, and author of several books about engineering management, remote work, and more. With James, we talked about what senior engineers will look like in the future, taken from a great article he wrote just recently. And then we got into how engineering management is changing, what's expected of managers today, and what you need to thrive. We also talked about AI adoption in his team, in our personal respective lives, and discussed the state of remote work in 2026. So let's dive into the action. Welcome, James, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hey, you're welcome. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
So, James, you are a CTO at Nordhealth, you're a former director at Shopify, and you're an accomplished author. You've written books about engineering management and remote work. And you also have a great newsletter, of which, as a fellow newsletter writer, I'm a fan. And speaking of which, I really liked your latest piece about who would be the senior engineers in 2035. And I would love to start this chat by asking you a few things about that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please do.
So basically in the article you sketch, I will add this to the show notes for those who haven't read it. And you sketch several possible futures about engineering roles, skills, the job market. So my first question is, what inspired you to write that article? So have you seen hints of this type of change either in your company or in how people work, in hiring? Are there signs of some of these things already, or you think it's just about the future for now?
I think it's a bit of everything. I mean, everyone who is in this industry at the moment is going through some kind of emotional narrative, and whether that narrative is like positive or negative depends on the person. There are some people who are incredibly excited. The nature of everything they do is completely changing. So it's time to learn new skills, new tools. The fact that I don't need to write boilerplate code anymore, there's that kind of person. But then you've also got equally people who are, whether they tell you explicitly or not, they're quite worried about their jobs. They're worried about what does it mean to be a programmer or developer or engineer anymore. They wonder what that means in the future. And also people wonder, well, what does it mean for computer science? What does it mean for new graduates? What is it? So there is just this swirl. And I think, the swirl happens whenever there is any kind of new technology. So the internet, that happened then. It happened when smartphones came out, the massive swirl of like the industry changing. The personal, before my time, but like when computers came about in general, like all of a sudden work has completely changed. So I think we're going through that again. And really it was just spending some time with myself and talking to colleagues and friends, just like where are things going? And I know that also the reason I wrote it is I naturally tend to be fairly optimistic. So my own personal view is like, this is really good in the sense that in the 1920s, somebody who was a computer was a human being who sat down doing mathematics to work out, like, in some model, how is a rocket going to fly or something. And we wouldn't wish that upon our children now, to be doing that in the future. They spend 10 hours a day doing maths on paper, right? But at the time, there were probably people thinking, well, that's my job. Like, what do I do? Where do I go from here? So that's where it came from. And I think also, just in a very long-winded answer here, is that there's a lot of sensationalism right now around what this all means. You've got the sort of the AI crew, trolling everybody online, saying that like, we're going to take everyone's jobs, yada, yada, AGI. And then you've got the sort of very sensationalist sort of the world is going to end crew. And I think maybe a kind of philosophy for how I try to think about things, and if people do read what I write, hopefully it comes through, is that there's always a middle ground. There's always a reason for you, and that's kind of where it came from.
Hey, before we continue, I was reading the X 2026 survey on how AI is impacting developer productivity, and the results were kind of surprising. One of the main call-outs is that AI tools still lack critical context. This is how they describe it. An AI assistant can't reason over a Slack thread from an archive channel or the mental model of the engineer who built it. So now that we are all coding with agents, it's clear that the gap is not a bigger context window or adding another MCP server. Until agents have the same tribal knowledge you have, the value you get from them is still limited. And this is exactly the type of problem our sponsor today, Unblocked, is solving for tens of thousands of developers. Unblocked is the context layer for modern engineering teams. It brings together your PRs, docs, conversations, tickets, and more, turning them into actionable context for both your team and their AI agents. Engineering teams that are getting ahead right now use a context engine like Unblocked to make better plans, write higher quality code, use fewer tokens, and spend less time in review cycles. So if you're running Claude Code, Cursor, or any agentic workflow, give Unblocked a try. Get a free 3-week trial at getunblocked.com/refactoring. Yeah, I love the answer, and I think it shows already in how you answered this. One of the things that I loved about that piece is how you were able to weave in a lot of historical references about how similar changes happened in other industries that are even very far from tech, that I think it helps people think, okay, this is not something completely exceptional. We've seen something like that before, maybe not exactly in tech, and we can kind of pattern match how things happened in the past.
Yeah, and think about compilers, right? I mean, that's my kind of like academic background. So I did a PhD in compilers, but like, how much do you think about what the compiler is doing when you're writing code? I mean, I'm not thinking about how the registers are being allocated or the assembly language. And are we going through a transition now where like just the level of abstraction is going up again? And in 10 years' time, 5 years' time, 3 years' time, probably even less, we're not even going to care about what our lines of Python or Java or JavaScript look like anymore,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is one of you outlined several scenarios, right, in the piece about things that may happen to engineering skills and the job market. And this is, I think, one of these, what you refer to tinkerers, and the fact that, at least the way I understand that, is every time we raise the level of abstraction, there's like a new class or expertise that emerges that is different from how we did things before. And so I guess the thesis is that junior engineers will be fine. They're eventually going to turn into senior ones, but the new senior engineers will look very different from maybe the ones that we're used to today. Is that what you mean with this?
Broadly speaking, and I think, if you look back through history, engineers of all kinds have been solving problems. And the class of those problems and the level of abstraction of those problems has changed. And is it the case now that we have found a new tool that really allows a dramatic acceleration of the level of abstraction that we work at? And it just becomes, can I think about problems in a high quality way, translate them into ways that computers can do things, and whatever the interface is for that to happen, whether it's natural language, whether it's brain-computer connection, I don't know. It's still problem solving. So, it's kind of making a case that the investment of people's skills is to maybe not think too much about the short term, but think about the long term. And what is it that's always been true, like an axiomatic, like constant, which is, intelligent people who are good at solving problems, who are good at thinking about, especially in like the commercial side of our industry, like how do we develop software tooling that makes people's lives better? That's what you need to be good at. Doesn't matter how, the tools will change.
Yeah, I love that. And I think this is your angle coming from, as you admitted at the beginning, you're more in the excited camp, right? Instead of the worried camp. But I agree with you that it feels like there is this big polarization, and people have strong feelings in a sense or another. But from your observation, what do you think makes some people excited about this versus worried about this? I mean, can we like pattern match and understand both sides really and find middle ground maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about this on the fly, but I think those who are mostly excited are maybe like outcome focused. So, I want to be able to create X or solve problem Y. It seems that I can do that more easily now. Therefore, I'm excited about that. Or I
Yeah,
can solve more X's or more Y's in a space of time. I think where there's some, suffering element or like sadness element is that those who very much attach themselves to the craft of programming right now,
yeah,
where, I don't know what kind of age you are, but like visually pattern matching, we've all lived through the kind of the clean
yeah,
code era, the Uncle Bob era. And these are
yeah,
very valid things about how to write code, how to become a software craftsperson, as it were.
yeah,
And you can if you identify with that and you sort of step outside of it, you can see how, like, if you have really grown yourself to become this like artisanal software craftsperson kind of shape, then all of a sudden that's just being eroded.
yeah,
And as we know, like, unfortunately, in the digital world, maybe not completely broadly, but broadly in the digital world, the value of the code or the pixels is next to nothing. It's like what they enable that is the valuable thing. It's the idea turns into capital, right? So in the same way that, like, I could see huge value in somebody being like an artisanal carpenter or an
yeah,
artisanal painter creating a physical thing, even if robots could create that thing, I'm like, oh, an oil painting, it's beautiful, it was made by a human being, a wonderful statue or something. Like, those things inherently hold value, but the value of artisanal code is zero.
yeah,
Unless there's probably some niche market, right? There's probably some
yeah,
like tiny amount of people, but like code inherently has no value. It's what the code does. So
yeah.
if you've attached yourself to the craft of code, and now there's no reason for that to be as important as it was before,
Mhm.
then we have some sadness there, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's not clear whether the path forward is letting go of that, right, and understand that, as you said, there was never like inherent value in the craft itself, or maybe there are patches and areas in which the craft retains value. And I mean, it's similar to, even if it's not the same thing, another scenario that you laid out is the one about what you call the bifurcation, in which on one end we end up with people who are extremely proficient with orchestrating AI agents, like strong vibe coders. For simplicity, let's call them like that. And on the other hand, we still have super strong senior engineers with great fundamentals that are able to, I don't know, create platform and steer these things to safety. And so we might say craft still matters for that type of work, but we don't know if that's what's going to happen, probably.
Yeah, it's true. And I think, again, it's like the level of abstraction changing as to what that craft means. So maybe the craft of exactly like each line of code being beautiful and each
Yes.
function being beautiful maybe either doesn't matter anymore or has been automated so much that it just happens by default. But, that bifurcation of here are the architects of the systems that are resilient and that they scale and that they can withstand the onslaught of the huge amounts of code being thrown at them all the time. That's a skill in the craft. And then
Yeah.
there is also at the other end the skill of, can I take the driver's seat with the
Yeah.
the steering wheel, and I can direct these tools to do things really, really well, really efficiently. That's another craft.
Yeah.
But the today's craft changes in the same way that, like, going back to the compiler analogy, the craft of like optimizing compilers has now become far more niche, and it used to be less niche. People were thinking about routines and subroutines and assembly language and all that far, far more. And now we just don't even really think about it for the day-to-day engineer.
Yeah, and when I read about what you wrote about the bifurcation, made me think how it looks similar to the conversations that we have today about, I don't know, product engineers on one end, people who drive like features from top to bottom, and platform engineering on the other end, where you build tools, you build things to make the generalists faster, right? And so maybe if the so-called bifurcation happens in the market, it's also because that's how we're working together. And probably there is this divide that may happen and kind of erode the middle class in between.
Yeah, I mean, I think so many things bifurcate in society and everything in general, and it feels like a model that could possibly explain what happens, but all of it will evolve from what we're doing today. And I don't certainly ever sit here and claim to know what's going to happen in the future because it changes so quickly. I mean, who'd have thought the last 5 years would have brought what they brought, right? Sitting here in 2020, 2019, saying, oh yeah, so basically like 90% of your code is just going to be written by AI. We'd have gone, what? Like, don't be silly. That's very, very silly. So I think like in the sort of like we're very bad at predicting in the short term, always. So trying to predict the long term is quite hard, but I think the destination is still the same. Like humanity is still going to want great software, great tooling, great abilities to get things done.
Yeah.
The way in which we do that may change, but the problems will still be there. And just in the same way that in like the Industrial Revolution in the UK, built all these factories, things could be produced very, very quickly. Did it mean that everyone then worked a 5-hour week? No, it just meant that we wanted more stuff and we wanted it quicker. And it's just the same thing's going to happen again.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So we've talked about this from the angle of software engineering, right? But I want to pick your brains about management a little bit too on these topics, because of course you've written a great book that is called Become an Effective Software Engineering Manager just a few years ago, but it feels like an era ago, right? As you said, 2019, 2020. And there is a lot of conversation about how this role is evolving, and some people also think that managers risk being caught in the middle of kind of this bifurcation, right? So, what do you see from your vantage point? Is this role changing already, or we are still thinking about speculation? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think even from without my view, there's things that you can see that have definitely happened in industry since the economy changed after the sort of 2021 period, where
Yeah.
organizations that grew very quickly, they then started to strip away and lay off many, many managers. So that's like an external force to the individual that the industry is saying to managers, we want less of you. Now, you can argue whether or not that is just because of overhiring or because the role is changing, but either way, it's happening. So that has to be thought about. And then, like, what's the nature of managers who are still succeeding? Is that they're very close to the details, they understand what's going on, they're not delegating away everything, they still maintain that kind of technical lead type persona as part of their role. And then if we then stitch that together with the more recent stuff with AI, well, AI lets you do more. The managers that I see that are really thriving at the moment are the ones that have embraced AI as the ability to actually still contribute. And the definition of contribute depends on the person. It might mean that they are still shipping features with their team because they can. It might mean that they're doing more prototyping. It might mean that they're building tooling. They're doing automation of something. But the fact is that, unless you are an organization that has some kind of extreme management philosophy where everyone has 55 direct reports or there are no managers, things have existed such a long time with the structure of companies that I think the role of a manager is still a desirable thing.
Yeah.
People like to have somebody that they report to, performance management, coaching, all that stuff's great. Still continues. But the day-to-day role now, I think, is managers are more technical, using AI, trying to still contribute, trying to effectively still wear that sort of technical lead hat. Those are the ones who I think are succeeding. The ones who I think are struggling, especially in the current climate, are the ones that have just become the manager and delegated everything else away. And I felt that, there probably was a time and at certain companies where you could just do that,
Yeah.
very much it's the craft of management, just coaching.
Yeah.
But I think in the current climate, at least, where it's all about efficiency and companies are really scrutinizing, everybody in their output, I don't think you can succeed long term by just doing that now.
Yeah. Don't you think there is kind of a paradox in that? Because you said before, and I agree 100% that there are just some things that are evergreen in the sense that people always will want to have a manager to report to, someone who coaches them, follows their career, etc. But these very evergreen things are also the things that we are saying that you just can't get away just with those anymore, right? You have to do more.
It's a good point. And I guess maybe the question then to answer, and this will probably depend on the individual, but I certainly know that if I just took those bits as part of my job, that's not 8 hours a day of a job.
Yeah.
The things that really make a difference are, I mean, say if you're running one team and there's a couple of projects going on in your team, like being close into the details of the project that is the most important one, making sure that the team's making the right technical decisions, contributing as well if you want to, if that's your strength, being able to collaborate with other people in the organization to get things done, all sorts of stuff, which I think is the extra parts of the role. And then if you add AI to automate things as well, then in the pre-AI era, you were drafting documents and reading things and processing information and repackaging information and sending it over here and talking to that person. You can automate so much of that stuff now as well. So you can do even more within the time that you have. So it's sort of, take that 2019 manager, give them the tools to strip away all of the grunt work, and then what is the space that's left? And then the question turns to, what do you do in the space that's left? And again, it depends on the person, it depends on the organization, but at least where I'm working, we have our managers contributing code again, building prototypes, just using AI in a way that lets them have the superpowers they previously didn't.
Yeah. And there's always been, aside from this specific shift today, right? There have always been in tech hybrid roles of people doing a bunch of each, both management duties and technical contribution. And we have often said these are very tricky roles to navigate because it's hard to figure out how to spend your time, what's the most important thing right now. And now it feels to me, because I agree with your take, that we are asking people to juggle more things at the same time, especially managers. Do you have advice on how to do that effectively? How to figure out what really deserves your attention, what you should be focusing on? Because I get that. I think they can be very confusing very fast.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think, I can only speak from my own experience here, but like some ways that I've been thinking about it are, to begin with, sometimes, and, I could even potentially be a contributor to the reason that this is the way in such that I wrote some of these things in my first book, which is you don't have to do the role in a particularly prescribed way. So if the best practice advice is you need to have a one-to-one every week with everyone in your team, it needs to be an hour, and then everyone's suddenly, oh wow, like if I've got a team of 8 people, that's a whole day gone. It doesn't have to be that way. So think of, could it be different? So just as an example, and I'm aware that like the people that report to me are probably more senior than the person who's on like an average frontline team. But I have like a 30-minute one-to-one once every 2 to 3 weeks with my direct reports. But that's fine because I'm very much in the details of all the projects they're doing anyway. So really that's just a sort of a touch base. Take it to its extreme. Go listen to Jensen at NVIDIA. He has like 55 or whatever direct reports. And because each of those people are like the world expert in whatever they do, he just doesn't even need to do check-ins with them, right? So it depends on the organization. So I'd say like rethink the way in which you're doing the role and think, is that actually because you want it to be that way or because you feel that you have to? And then see whether there's anything you can change. And then really the juggling part is just okay, well, what's the most important thing? And it sounds like businessy, but your customers are your most important thing. So like you're here in order to serve your customers. What is most important for your customers? Work backwards from that, and it's like, well, that's the most important thing right now. It's this particular feature or this particular problem.
Yeah.
That's the most important way I need to spend my time. And then also, borrowing from Andy Grove, as someone who leads a team, the output of the team is like your output,
Yeah.
right? So is everybody pointed in the right way in order for you to maximize your output? Think about that and then gravitate towards the thing that increases the output the most.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great evergreen answer. I mean, to go back to the things that stay true and are evergreen. I love high output management, and written 6 years ago just shows how, some mental models stay good like forever.
Yeah, true.
There was a question I wanted to ask you, and you probably answered that already in a way, but I'll ask you anyway. So you have written a book about becoming an effective engineering manager, probably, to use your words, for managers of 2019, right before all of this. Is that something in there that you would write differently today because you think it's changed, or it's no longer true, or you were phrased differently? Maybe it's some of the things you've already said about, not being able to be purely people manager. Maybe it's something else. I don't know.
That's a really good question. I was actually thinking about that the other day, completely unrelated to this, where, would any of that book be different? Like I did try and write it in a very evergreen way. Because there's also practical reasons. If you write a book like that in an evergreen way, you never have to update the book, which is kind of nice.
Yes.
Unlike
Yes.
if you're writing about like Rails 5 and then you need to write the Rails
Yes.
6 book. There's not a huge amount. But what I would have done is called out what I would call maybe like environmental pressure to have managers do more and more and more. And also the cultural changes within the industry, which usually come from a small subset of people who have outsized voices in the industry. However, they then make the whole industry feel that things have to change to be a certain way. So we will see how Elon Musk works. We will see how all these various other CEOs have like stamped their cultural way of doing things onto the world. And because they are notable people, there is an outsized effect on how many people think that everything has now changed.
Yeah.
But I can guarantee you that there are like hundreds of thousands of companies who aren't like that and don't need to be like that and don't have to be like that. It's just what gets the most attention, right? So
Yeah.
I would probably, if I was to redo the first book, I'd probably maybe either weave in or add a chapter on, but hey, given this craft doing this job well, how does it stand up to scrutiny from those who don't believe in the craft in a certain way, or maybe have a different viewpoint? And I think the fundamentals still stay true, which is like, if you are running a team, you're responsible for the team's output. You put yourself in the details of what they're doing. You get close to the things that you need to be close to. You make sure that the team is doing well. But no, I think the content still stands. It's more to do with how you manage your time, how you communicate, how you coach, how you do all that kind of stuff, which is still truth. And the truth remains the same, I think.
Yeah. One thing that we have said about managers benefiting now from staying more in the details, closer to technical work. I think it relates to some storytelling that we hear, that hierarchies are going to flatten a little bit, and we're going to have fewer levels, because managers now can stay closer to technical work. And so managers of managers are going to become, maybe less of a thing. You're going to have more reports and things like that. Do you see that happening already? Do you see that happening ever? Maybe it's one of those evergreen things that it's not going to happen. I don't know.
I think we'll have to maybe wait to go see what happens when we go through another economic boom cycle like we did in like the previous decade again, and see what happens. Now, history would have you tell that humans never learn any lessons ever. So we will probably once again hire 6 million people, and suddenly need lots and lots and lots of managers all over again. I can just foresee it already. However, in terms of seeing it play out now, I think about my own organization. Like I'm at the moment since I joined, I've been in role for a year. I've been very open with the department. Like, I don't want us to grow in size at the moment. Like, I would rather us stay fixed size as a constraint, and then use that constraint in order to prioritize better. Because I think so much sort of software engineering company bloat comes from continually thinking that n+1 people will always solve the problem, when actually what you need to do is just say no to more things and like focus down on the problem. And as a result, like I have a very flat organization. Like all the frontline teams just report directly to me through engineering managers. And therefore, if I'm like, oh, am I ever going to have a VP engineering or engineering director, then the amount of extra org that you need to exist in order to make their presence worthwhile is like double, which is not going to happen. But going back even further, what's the reason that so much of the conversation went around, how do I become a good manager in the first place? Well, for a long time, companies didn't have proper parallel tracks of you can continue to be an IC and keep going, keep getting paid more and more and more and more and more. And therefore, you don't need to be a manager. You could just stay as a really impactful IC. Like, I think we're over that hump now, which is good. So maybe a lot of the pressure that previously existed to create and maintain management positions and managers of managers and all this kind of thing is less of a problem going forwards, because people know that they can stay as ICs.
It makes a lot of sense. Also, what you said about trying not to grow at all costs and stay put and optimize where things where you're at headcount wise, it's something I'm hearing from a lot of founders as well, and companies who are healthy companies. They want to grow, but I mean, their response to this whole AI confusion about how you should organize work is that, of course, we are not going to lay off people because we want to grow. We see the value from engineers and from everyone, but they're also more like concerned about hiring a lot because they want to get the most out of the team as they work right now, and they feel like they can do more. And as you said, hiring more people gets always things more complicated and makes things messier, and so they're being more cautious. Is that something you're seeing as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think constraints are a really good thing. Like, if you constrain the number of people, the amount of time that you spend on something, it always means like more creative and innovative things happen. So having a culture where you always have to hire to do more or do better, it just kind of creates a fake kind of like leak in your organization as to actually what you need to fix is how you think, how you prioritize, and what kind of clever work you do. I mean, a thought exercise, right? Like, imagine that as an engineer, you could do everything from coding to listening to customers, talking to customers, doing the company accounting, all that kind of thing. Would the perfect size of a company be one engineer? I mean, I don't know whether we'll ever reach that in the future with AI, but if it's true that the non-negotiable part of the company, a software company, is somebody who writes code at some point, because you don't have a software company without code, then kind of working backwards from like, what's the minimum set of people that we really need to do what we need to do, is an interesting exercise. And I think, for companies that are smaller right now, they're not going through mass layoffs because they don't have a mass of people to lay off, right? It's the previous era of, okay, well, growth is the most important thing for either the value of the company or whatever. Therefore, we've hired 5,000 people in the last year. That's now becoming the problem that needs to be reversed, because I think going from the exercise of what's the minimum number of people you need to run this company with AI now is much smaller.
Yes.
So if you're in a smaller company, it doesn't really matter. But I've often wondered that, if one engineer could do everything, would a company just be one engineer?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting exercise, and I think like a smaller, less extreme version of this exercise is something that I think many founding teams or very small teams or early stage startups kind of implicitly go through, in the sense that now that there are more autonomous workflows and kind of agentic workflows you can experiment with, I think there is a very real question about for some things, whether you invest more into autonomous AI processes that need human oversee, of course, or what's the point where it's worth to hire an expert in this, right? I mean, it felt, I think, easier to judge before all of this. Now, even if we, of course, we're not saying we don't need people anymore. I mean, we're not saying all of that. We're just saying, I think, that it's messier to make the decision now about where you put the frontier, the border between I do this myself, I do this with AI, I do this with a specialist that I'm hiring for this.
Absolutely, and I think that's the reflection on where we are as an organization, because we're keeping flat because we feel at the moment that given all of the new technology that we have access to via AI, do we know the upper limit of productivity of an engineer right now? I think no, we really don't know. So we should probably invest our time in thinking how we can get towards that limit first before we think about needing to bring on more people.
Yes. That's so interesting. And so how is it going in your company? That is, how is the AI adoption is too broad of a question, right? But how has that maybe impacted not just individual productivity, but actual workflows within the team that may have changed because of these new capabilities?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey, sort of like since I joined, like that was one of the main things I've been focusing on. And starting with engineering, but then like going out to the rest of the company too. So the initial period was very. I'm going to borrow from Andy Grove again. So thank you, Andy. Sort of the let chaos reign thing at the beginning, and then you then rein in the chaos. So to begin with, it was just kind of like, hey, everyone just like use what you want. And the tools are changing so quickly. There's a new tool every week. Let's just experiment. However, when you experiment, you share what you're doing. We have like various Slack channels for posting, what you're up to and AI related news, and just kind of get discussion going every single day. And then over time, it kind of tapered down to, okay, well, people are either using Cursor or they're using Claude Code. That just kind of seemed to be where people settled without any kind of natural mandate. It just kind of happened. So now pretty much that's where we are. And that has meant that we can centralize more on, okay, well, let's configure these tools on our code bases more properly so that we have sort of like the efficiencies of everybody being on the same tool now. And more recently as well, we now, thanks to co-work, we have sort of Claude across the whole organization, and we're seeing really awesome things. Like, we have as like a demos channel for people doing things with AI, and we're seeing people in the finance team automating manual workflows, and they're like, this used to take me a whole day, it's now done in 10 minutes. We had one of the sales team doing sort of ROI calculators. They just built an app that does all these particular kind of like dashboards that help them sell the product. And it's just amazing. Like, again, you look back 5 years ago and think,
yes,
okay, we've got like salespeople coding now. This is great. So it's been like a really just, personally, I've just found it really lovely just seeing how everybody has been super open-minded and has, with a little bit of encouragement, have understood the possibilities, and now creativity is back in the workplace, and it's just really fun, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. And when you say Claude is happens across the organization, have you created some kind of workspace that does Claude access a vault of documents, something that is like intentionally shared, or it's up to the individual to create their own projects, their own set of shared docs? How does it work?
Sure. I mean, we've got like fairly standardized single sources of truth at the company. So we use Notion as our sort of single source of documentation. Then we're on G Suite for people's calendars. We're on Slack. All the normal stuff that you would expect. And having like Claude Enterprise means that we've sort of connected all these things together. And it now means that you can just query, what does the organization think about this? And it will find the various documentation sources and pull it all together. And it's amazing. Just like being able as well, personally, like I sort of drive my day from Claude Code, just got like it in the terminal. And at the time of recording, the article's not out, but I'm posting an article soon in my newsletter about like my Claude Code setup for all the sort of automations I do for myself.
Yeah.
And it's just great. Like I can go from thinking of an idea to drafting a document to pulling in documentation to doing a first pass and then publishing it to Notion in like 10 minutes.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah. It is. It is for real. And speaking of what you said before about the fact that it's hard to find the upper limit, have you found like reliable ways to measure the impact of using AI and these workflows, and or even just being able to say we are doing good, right? With respect to whom we don't know, but anyway, we can say we're doing good.
Yeah. Now, I'm not a person who believes in like strict measurement of all these things,
Yeah.
but certainly I have been keeping an eye on like which engineers are spending the most money, but using that as a, oh, that's not a bad thing. Like, okay, you're actually seemingly getting a lot of usage out of this thing. What are you actually doing with it? And then you kind of extract the stories, you share it. So it's been amazing. Claude has been incredible at writing tests, automation tests
Yes.
as well, documentation. Also, broadly pointing it at the code base with a very, very broad problem. Like, this area of the app seems slow. Why?
Yeah.
And then it will go away and actually come up with some plans that have, we've shaved like seconds off of API endpoints, tens of seconds off particular processes just by throwing tokens at the problem.
Yeah.
And it's incredible at that. So we're sort of like, as we're learning these like different categories of problems that it's very, very, very good at, those get shared around. And yeah, it's been kind of quite transformational for what I find, and I don't know if you find the same thing, is that because these tools are new and I've existed for longer than the tools have existed, I have a natural, almost like physical, emotional response to like what is a hard problem
Yes.
versus an easy problem. To the extent that when I see a problem, my initial reaction might be, oh, that's too big, or oh, I'm not even going to try that because that's big. And then you have to like push through that barrier
Yes.
and go, you know what, I'm actually going to try this with the tools. And then you sort of like learn that no, it's not as big as you thought. You can investigate some very tricky, slow rendering problem
Yeah.
that maybe would have put you off before because the tools can really help you now.
Yeah. I struggle with exactly the same thing, and I think other than the fact that, as you said, we've been around for some time, so we have this kind of general intuitions about what's hard, what's not hard. I think it's very hard in this specific case because maybe, let's say, even you spend a lot of time experimenting with these and you get a very precise, it's very hard to, but let's say you're able to get a very precise intuition of what the AI is able and not able to do. Then you can't really rely on that intuition for too long anyway, right? Because the models come out very frequently, one after the other, and maybe you switch between Claude and Codex. And so can you really trust that intuition? Is it really worth it to build that intuition in the first place, right? Instead of trying maybe the broadest possible. I mean, you said you can just tell Claude, the app feels slower here, right? The broadest thing possible, and you get value out of that, and it's amazing. And it's kind of the pushback that I have, for example, against all the trend of spec-driven development, heavy specs beforehand. I mean, if you're able to create them, good for you. But how many times do you have such clarity before starting a feature or a project? And do you have to get to the AI only when you have all of these fully formed in your mind? It feels like a waste to me.
Yeah, I agree. Like it's just it's the same as like writing. Like you don't know what you're going to finish with until you actually do it because the doing is the process of
Yes.
finding out.
Yes.
So it's exactly the same with software development or any kind of like process of creating. You don't just design the thing up front and then it's just a case of, oh, okay, I just need to type this out or whatever. It never works that way.
Yes. Yes. And it's probably better to to start earlier, shift left in the process of getting help from AI, bouncing ideas off and brainstorming, and maybe get to a full spec, but together before you already had it fully formed in your head. Because yes, writing is thinking and it's the actual work. So I agree with, as a newsletter writer, I of
Yeah,
course
yeah.
agree with that.
But there's even with the newsletter writing, there's so many incredible little like tools that I've sort of hacked together with. For example, like I'm a Claude user in sort of personal life as well, so I've got Claude Code on my phone. I do all of my sort of like ideas and drafts in a directory which is on GitHub, private directory
Yes.
where I keep all my stuff. So I sort of defined a template for what I would call like an idea file, which is capturing a potential idea of something I want to write about in the future at the time, and then I can come back to it later. So I can be out like walking the dog, listening to a podcast, or I hear something really interesting, and I'll be, oh, that's good. And then I open Claude Code,
Yes.
dictate, create an idea file on this particular topic, and then baked into the template, it will then go away, search the internet, find out who's written about this before, check that I've not written about it before, make sure that, you know, I'm not duplicating something. And it's kind of like the work of a research assistant
Yes. Yes.
anytime. And it's incredible. It's incredible.
Yes, I think it's very underrated how these tools can make the capturing part of the work way easier. And you know, you have an idea, you can just dictate on your phone, send a voice note, and you know, the genie will go out and do things for you and do research and create a note and something that otherwise maybe you would have created a task for yourself while you were away and then go back to your computer and do the thing. It's easily like a 10x improvement in a way in the amount of things and the quality of things you're able to capture from your ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. And the sort of the 10x thing feels like the 10xing would have been available before if I had employed somebody to do it.
Yes.
But I was never going to employ somebody to do it as a hobbyist writer because it's not profitable.
Yes. Yes.
But now that's available. So actually, I've sort of skipped 2 levels. I've gone from the experience of having somebody do it for me to the experience of a superhuman sort of agent doing it for me. So it's just, it feels 10 times 10 for me.
Yeah, yeah. And funny fact, I mean, I do this full time, and so one of the things that I've always considered, because I have friends who've done it, is like to hire an assistant. I mean, years back, right? And who can help with a lot of things, with scheduling, with capturing also things, and I always resisted that because I never felt like I had enough work to delegate and to work with another person on this. And then ironically, after I started working with OpenClaw, Claude on the phone, you know, AI assistants, I figured out, oh, okay, I had a lot of work actually. I could have hired someone years ago and it would have been totally worth it, because I think it's only after you have some capability available that you realize how much you can do with it. It's very hard beforehand to understand that.
Yeah, and like even outside of like my domain and you know, working with my partner as well. So my partner, you know, she does things that I wish that I could do. So she's an amazing illustrator, painter, you know, she's a creative person, and we both paired with Claude to create effectively a workbook for a whole year of, okay, so in her spare time, like she's, you know, we've got a young daughter at the moment, she's only got limited spare time, but we wanted to come up with a plan for how over the next 12 months there could be various different creative projects that were related to things that she would be doing with our daughter, such as like going outdoors into nature, experiencing different things with her, but how also to create almost like a curriculum of paintings, drawings, illustrations, ideas. And we did it all with Claude, and it came up with like a 12-month creative plan to like every single day, you know, make these sketches, make these charcoal drawings, you know, paint this particular thing. And then over the course of the year, you effectively come out with like an entire like 4-season art piece. That is just like, what you can do is limitless, and it just takes a little bit of thinking as to what's possible now, because
Yeah,
that's
but I think
changed.
it's like a muscle. I mean, the more you use it, the more you can think of ideas on how to use it. The more, of course, the more context it has on your life and work. You know, the easier it is to ask to do another thing, because it's just, you know, the incremental instruction that it needs. So yes, but it is amazing indeed. So
I
I
mean,
wanted
honestly,
to.
I've never been this kind of like excited or having as much fun as I have recently. I think in many years. I think, I don't know about you, but it's made work fun again for me.
Yeah, no, for me too. I mean, one of the joys for me has been being back to coding like big way, in a way that I didn't think I would have been able to as I mean, as a former founder who used to be a jack of all trades, and so having fun coding across the whole stack, to now newsletter writer with, of course, some side projects, but they're never big things. Now instead having the joy of being able to create products again for myself and from others. This has really changed a lot about my mood, about work, and it's been great, honestly. Yes.
100%, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to keep that the final segment of the interview to talk about something that unfortunately we don't hear too much about anymore. It feels like in 2026, that is remote work, because you have written a great book about that too, and now feels like the dust has settled. This is not in the headlines anymore, but at the same time, my feeling is that return to office wars continue in the background because now there's only AI in the news. What do you think is the state of remote work in 2026? What do you see from your vantage point?
Well, I'm still working remotely, and it's
Yeah.
fine. I mean, I think it's one of those things where, like, before remote was such a hot topic, which was spurred on by the pandemic for obvious
Yeah.
reasons, remote companies existed, and they have existed
Yes.
for a long time. Remote companies still exist, 100%.
Yeah.
Now, during the pandemic, I think that because everyone was forced to go remote, that there was, a feeling that everyone or all big companies would become remote forever. And I guess maybe that hypothesis was a poor hypothesis. Now, I'm not going to sit here and give any particular opinion as to whether being in an office is better than being remote. That's not, everyone is different. We're all different humans. We all like different things. We all work in different ways. So each to their own on that particular one. Now, you could maybe unpack this as to why is it that some companies like to have offices? Well, I mean, small companies maybe just like to be together. Great. Why do absolutely humongous companies like having their humongous offices? I don't know. Maybe it works. Maybe it doesn't. I don't measure these things. But certainly, if as an individual you want to work for a remote company, positions exist. Like, you can go and you can
Yes.
find a remote job. And my hypothesis also is that they will always exist, because we all sit here and use exactly the same tools to build software that we'll be using if I was sitting next to you IRL anyway, right? It's just like we're all using the same programming languages, the same AI, we're using GitHub.
Yes.
It doesn't matter where you are, right? So I think it's just really one of those things where the spotlight faded in the same way the spotlight faded on Web3 and NFTs and all these things, but it still kind of exists. But maybe there was a desire to see a complete industry shift where offices would be no more everywhere, and that it would just be this remote utopia. Well, I mean, I think that not everyone is cut out for remote work. I think, like, I know I am personally, like, I like the independence, I like the autonomy, I like being able to have a lot of like focus and like turn down the social dial so that I can really like feel like I can concentrate. Other people are very, very different. So each to their own. And if you want a remote job, you'll find one. Are you going to earn as much money with your remote job as you would working for Meta in their office? No. But there is also a reason that Meta pay so much, is because they want to get people living there and working in their office, right, in a very expensive area.
Yes.
So it swings and roundabouts, isn't it? You have to sort of think, well, is the remote versus non-remote actually a lifestyle question? What do you want your life to be like? And for me, it is. It's like, I don't necessarily sit here at home working at home because I've always desired to sit at a desk for my entire life. It's more the lifestyle thing of, do I get to do my work in the conditions that I enjoy? Check. Do I get to be close to my family at the same time? Check. Do I get to have more flexibility on where I live? Check. So it works for me. But maybe if you're the kind of person who wants to meet loads of people, be inside a busy social life, sit next to people, talk to people, this isn't going to work for you.
Yeah. But I think this is already a sensible realization with respect to extreme takes that we have seen on one end or the other end during these years. And I think it probably took the pandemic to transport us to the extreme end of the other spectrum from which we came from, to make us understand that there is no one reality that is strictly better than the other, and depends on many factors, as you mentioned. So you're saying that, let's say you're a founder, you're thinking about the culture and the structure of your company. It's just a matter of, it's a culture choice. It depends how you thrive, how you like to work, and that will attract different types of people. But there is no better or worse. That's what we are saying.
I don't think there is. I mean, if you were starting a company tomorrow, then you could think, okay, well, just because I'm in the UK, do I open up an office in London and then I'm hiring for people to be in this office every single day? There will be some cohort of talent who that is their dream, and they will come and work for you. Fantastic. But then also, if you did it from home or just remote in general, then you think, okay, well, there's a cohort of people across the world, which is a much larger market, who you could work together with, but with the downside that if you need that in-person interaction, then you're not going to get that in such an easy way. It all depends on the person, I think, and what you're after. And I personally feel that I've done the period of my life where I want to be in a super crazy busy office in the kind of environment like that.
Yeah, me too.
I would rather not go back to that. But there are equally people who are of the same generation as me who really love it and they want to, and they've gone back to that. So
yeah,
everyone's different.
I think there was also a train of thought about remote being a forcing function for like a healthier way of working that is more asynchronous, less dependent on being everyone in the same room. But I actually don't know. I don't know what's your take on this. I don't know if that's really a forcing function. I think there are dysfunctional companies that work in offices, just like there are dysfunctional companies that work remotely. And I don't think it changes that much.
No, it definitely doesn't. I mean, personal preference, for example. I hate meetings. Like, I'm probably in the wrong role for not liking meetings, but like, fortunately, our company is very sort of anti-meeting in general, and we try and do a lot asynchronously, which suits me, again, individual preference. Because being on video calls all day is not my happy place. It makes me just feel awful at the end of the day. So if I had to be in a very meeting-heavy culture, I'd much rather do that in person, because at the very least it feels less.
It's a different energy. This. Yes, absolutely.
Totally different. So is one healthier or more unhealthy? No, I don't think so. Again, what you said is true. Dysfunction exists at both extremes. But, when it comes to the remote side, can I live in a place that's much closer to all my family? Yes.
Yes.
And that's the thing that matters for me right now. Will it matter in 10 years? Don't know. But right now, this is groovy.
Yes. Love that. Thank you so much, James. This was a great chat. We covered a lot of ground, and talk soon again, and thank you again.
Yeah, likewise. It's been great. Thanks for inviting me. It's really good.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this chat valuable, you can subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the show. You can find all past episodes and learn more about the show at refactoring.fm. See you in the next episode.